Ladies and gentlemen, our next session, Beyond the Game, the Future of the Sports Business.
Okay, my name is Jenè, Elzie, and I'm going to be moderating the panel, and I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Adam Blumenfeld. I'm the chief executive of a company called Varsity Brands.
Good afternoon, everybody. Kenny Albert, play-by-play broadcaster, NFL on Fox, NHL on TNT, and Madison Square Garden Networks, New York Knicks, and New York Rangers.
Jim Rossman. I'm an operating advisor for the firm by the name of Sportsology.
So we're here today to talk about innovation, specifically as it impacts the business of sport. Now, just by definition, innovation, not a difficult concept. It just means introducing something new or different, a new product, a new service, and a new idea into an ecosystem. Now, when we think about innovation, oftentimes we'll think about tangible, disruptive technology, things that we can see, touch, experience. We've spent a lot of time today talking about artificial intelligence as an example. The way that that shows up in sports, anybody in here a sports fan? I'm going to assume there's a few in here. That impacts everything from the way that we watch the game, so the way that the cameras show up, the way that we measure and call a game, the products that we buy, ticketless, certainly since COVID, just a lot of different ways that we can see on the screen. But did you ever think about areas of innovation that you might not even know are happening? That's what this panel is about today, is what's going on behind the scenes in parts of the sports ecosystem that are not always right front and center. So, to start the conversation, I'm going to ask each of you gentlemen to just explain a little bit about the part of the sports business that you represent.
Sure, happy to, Jenè. Good afternoon. Varsity Brands, I'm biased now, but I'd like to believe that we are the best kept secret in sports. People don't often know the Varsity Brands name or our trade names that are underneath it, but we are charged and have charged ourselves with bringing pride, spirit, enthusiasm, and passion back into grade school, high school, collegiate communities, and out-of-school club select travel communities in a variety of different ways. So it can be under our trade names BSN Sports and Varsity Spirit. So it's athletic apparel and equipment, cheer, dance, and band. And we are doing it through how we outfit the kids, how we outfit the teams, really a one-stop shop for how we help a school rethink what it means to have a bespoke, curated line of memorabilia and goods that reflect their culture and what they stand for. That's moving its way, to your point on innovation, towards from a B2B world, where we've existed for 50 years, to a B2B2C and a B2C world, where now increasingly the family, the fan, the supporter, everything we can do to create that connective tissue between the supporting community and the high schools, the colleges, the out-of-school programs that they have affinity towards. That's where we play, and it's been what we do.
Kenny.
Thanks, Jenè. I work in front of the camera, in front of the microphone, so I'm not an expert on the technological side, as many of the folks are who are here with us today. But for the last 3 decades or so, I've sat in hundreds and thousands of production meetings. We go into the production truck before each and every game. So I'm certainly aware of a lot of the behind-the-scenes operations and innovations on the technological side. But just to give an example of how things work, on a typical NFL Sunday, how many of you watch NFL games on a Sunday afternoon, Sunday night, Monday night, Thursday night? Most of the audience and most of the viewers, I would assume, have watched at least one throughout their lives. On a typical Sunday game that I work, I was in Green Bay, Wisconsin on Sunday. I'll be in Indianapolis this Sunday. People are amazed when they hear this, but there are probably 75 to 100 people involved in getting that broadcast on the air. You have the 3 announcers, the play-by-play announcer, the color analyst, and the sideline reporter. But down in the truck, in the stadium, 75 to 100. For a Super Bowl, it's between 800 and 1,000 working on the technical side. whether it's the producer, the director, the technical director, the people handling graphics, the cameramen and women, the men and women handling the replay machines, et cetera. So I know we'll get into some of the innovations over the next little while, but it takes a village to get a broadcast on the air, no matter what the sport, but in particular the NFL.
And as I mentioned before, I work for a firm called Sportsology. Sportsology is a consultancy that's nearly 10 years in tenure now, and we've worked over the course of that near decade with as many as 60 professional sports teams, the Big Five in the U.S. and the European sports leagues. And as a firm, we tend to be engaged by either the CEO or owner of the team, with a focus really on two areas, ultimately on optimizing sports operations performance. And we do that in one of two ways. We're fixated on winning more on the field, and also, tongue-in-cheek, winning more on the income statement and balance sheet. And as consultancies do, over the course of that 10-year tenure, and the repeated engagement with a variety of teams, men's and women's, both in the U.S. and in Europe, we've built a series of processes and products, workshops, and audits that give us an opportunity to enhance the quality of team, of culture, of operations, and ultimately the commercial establishment at large.
Thank you. So Kenny, I believe I heard somewhere that your career started out with a machine called a tape recorder. A little different. We've evolved now a bit.
That is true.
So can you talk to us about how, going from the tape recorder to where we are today, how you specifically use innovation and technology to prepare for how you call a game?
Well, I did receive a tape recorder for my birthday from my parents when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and started announcing games into a tape recorder. I set up my bedroom like a radio or TV studio. I had the desk and the bed in the middle and the TV on the other side, and wrote the team rosters out in notebooks. So it all started back then. And then actually a huge break in 10th grade. I was doing a lot of writing for the high school newspaper and the town paper, so I was at all the games at my high school on Long Island. And by total coincidence, a local cable station, Cox Cable of Great Neck, a neighboring town, came to my school. I was in 10th grade. They had a little production van and 2 cameras. That was it, no announcers. So I volunteered, and then over the course of the next 3 years, received invaluable experience working games all over the island, high school, college, in all of the sports you can imagine. So it started with that little 2-camera shoot in 1984 in high school, and now for the last 30 years working with Fox. And, you know, when I think back to the early days calling the NFL games, first of all, there was no internet. There were no cell phones back then. So to prepare, we were reading weekly newspapers, publications, information we were sent via mail or FedEx or UPS. We wouldn't get it until Thursday, and you had to scramble to prepare for a game on Sunday. Obviously now, with one click on the internet, you can read any article you want from any city. Back then, in 1994, they were sending us VHS tapes of each team's previous game to watch and study, and they wouldn't arrive until Wednesday. They would make copies on Monday, send them out on Tuesday. We would watch on Wednesday. It then became DVDs a few years later, and now, whether it's DirecTV in the past, YouTube, on your phone, on an app, you could pretty much watch any sporting event whenever you want. So as far as the preparation aspect of what I do, it's become a lot easier. I could start watching the games on Monday morning. I could start reading articles from any city in the world on Monday morning instead of waiting for a packet to arrive on Thursday or a roll to come out of a fax machine. For those of us old enough to remember, 40 pages long on that circular paper. So the biggest aspect of my job before actually getting on the air on television and radio is preparation. So technology has been huge through the years in helping us just do everything a lot faster. There's also so much out there. You can immerse yourself in too much information 24/7, so you kind of have to know where to look and pare it down a little bit at times.
Thank you. You referenced about a dozen things that only exist on Wikipedia now. So
Exactly.
it's really amazing when you think of how far that, how
I feel
far
like when
we've
I
come.
talk about, growing up and working without cell phones and the internet, it's like when our parents or grandparents talked about first getting a television or only having black and white TV.
Yep, walking miles to school in the snow. Yeah.
I've heard that one.
That
Uphill,
one.
both ways, uphill.
Both ways uphill. Very impressive. So, Adam, a lot of what we talk about at this conference today are around generations, specifically Gen Z, which is a very, very difficult audience to reach, as we all know. And what I just learned, Gen Alpha. We've now gone all the way back to the top of the alphabet. So Gen Alpha, born in 2013 and beyond. That is your business. And it is such an important part of the greater sports ecosystem, right? Being a fan starts at that age. So tell me how Varsity thinks about that particular cohort and why it's so important to the broader sports world.
It's a great question. I agree with you, naturally, that fandom starts at a young age. But the idea of building a brand inside a team or group or community or school doesn't start in high school or college anymore. And maybe it never did. It starts even in my hometown of Dallas, Texas. There are schools like Southlake and others. You're a dragon. You're a Southlake Carroll dragon from the time that you're 7 years old. And you learn how to embrace that brand and champion that brand all the way up through the time that you're in high school. And it is a source of pride. And it's a source of passion and enthusiasm and engagement on campus. We've done a lot of work in the last 7 or 8 years. We've done a Harris poll to prove out the thesis that kids that are more engaged, more enthusiastic, particularly starting at a young age, guess what? They drop out less. They come to class more. They graduate on time. They come back to the community, and they serve. So it's not just about building pride for the sake of feeling good, but that's really important. It's also about, for us, building tomorrow's leaders. We get a chance at our company through Varsity to touch 1/6 of the U.S. population. It's 55 million kids that we get a chance to influence. They're in this range of alpha to millennial kinds of ages. And if we do our job right, we've got 2,000 ex-sales professionals across the country that are seeing face-to-face these coaches. And our job is to make these coaches the heroes on Friday night, not to have to worry about the back of the house kind of stuff, so they can go engage with their kids, engage with their parents, and give them the highlight reel of an experience that they really deserve. It starts in the 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old class, not just in Pop Warner football, but also in the schoolhouses in America. And I'm probably not doing anything but preach to the choir when I say that some of that engagement and enthusiasm post-COVID got lost. People weren't going to school. People weren't participating in all the activities they're participating in now. And we've been doing a ton of work, and thankfully it's been working to bring people back into these schoolhouses, back into team sport. Because all the lessons you learn in team sports, and you start learning them at a really young age, apply themselves to the kind of work that you might end up doing later on in life.
Absolutely. And, we talk about sports. I think one of the things that I really enjoy about sports is that it brings people together, and it is a passion play, right? Sports and brands are passion play, and what you're talking about is that whole idea of that starts so much earlier than we ever think about. So I think that's really, really important. So Jim, in another life, pre-Sportsology, you touched upon sports in a couple of different ways. One way, and specifically, when we think about owners, sports, specifically leagues and teams, right? You've got athletes, leagues, and teams, and that makes the product that goes onto the field, onto the pitch, the things that we watch. And for a long time, the idea of an investor or an owner in a sport was one person, right? You had the owner, maybe you had the family. We're in New York. George Steinbrenner comes to mind, the Dolan family. You go a little bit further out west, out to where you are, Jerry Jones. That has started to change in pretty significant ways. And also the idea was that when you owned a team or you owned a sports asset, it was something that you did because you were really passionate about it. It's taken a long time for sports to be seen as a business and investment asset. We've made a lot of progress, and now it is that way. So tell us a little bit about that and how much that has changed over the years.
Sure. I think there's a number of factors at work that have sort of made that come to be. I think, as you've referenced, sporting assets, franchises are worth a heck of a lot more money than they were a decade or 20 years ago. And that always gets into the question of, well, what really has prompted that? And as the theme of Zeta today is really around innovation, at least our section for innovation upstairs, it's vision. I think one of the most striking elements of valuation change as it relates for franchises is the onset of streaming and ad-skipping technology. We lived in a world where the product or content was available in a prescribed or scheduled environment, and technology has changed that. And that's really prompted a situation where the consumer, to his or her benefit, is afforded the opportunity of choosing when she or he wishes to engage with the content. With that said, the Fortune 100, 500,000 advertisers are desperate for that engagement with the content and the surety of engaging with that content. And live, unscripted content is one of the few content forms that are out there where an advertiser can be certain that his or her message is going to be received, and the derivative implications of what it means for pull-through in a retail environment and the type of transactive moments that she or he desires. Is evidence of that in 2022, of the 100 largest broadcast events, 94 of them were live event sports contests. So that's one material driver associated with that.
Yeah. That's amazing. I was waiting for you to throw that stat out, because when you told me that, that was shocking for even me, and I watch a lot of sports. But it does go to the idea of there's just a never-ending appetite for live sports.
I think that's true. I think another material element of what's made sports valuable is investors are always excited about the prospect of relative surety as it relates to the revenue streams associated with their businesses. And this wonderful content that is of great interest to broadcasters and now streamers is prompting them to make multi-year commitments around that broadcast opportunity. But even things like luxury boxes or season tickets have a degree of stickiness associated with their revenue streams that are also attractive. A second piece, as you alluded to before, sports were bought almost exclusively by high net worth individuals. And over the course of the last 3 to 5 years, you've seen a changing dynamic of who might be able to participate in purchasing sports. And so now you see institutions, my former employer, Silver Lake, sovereign net worth or wealth funds, also participating. And so that has increased the amount of demand. Pricing is always about supply and demand. And what's fascinating about the supply equation is when we think about the 5 sports in the US market, for all intents and purposes, supply hasn't changed. The last 2 additions to Major League Baseball were in 1998. The last 2 additions, both to the NFL and to the NBA, were in 2002. So we haven't had any new product come to market in the US in the face of all this terrific demand. And so the implication of that has been that pricing has escalated. And if we reflect on the value of these 5 sports over the course of the last decade, on average, they've increased anywhere in the range of 12 to 22% each year for the last 10 years.
It's a pretty good bet. So, Kenny, we've spent a lot of time talking about media and the value of the younger generation, Generation Z and Gen Alpha. What have you seen from your perspective in terms of the ways, new and different ways that we're reaching and engaging that audience?
Well, I think we've seen a lot in that respect, Jenè. The last couple of years, the NFL has had at least one playoff game per year on Nickelodeon, which is the same broadcast that's on one of the other networks. I think it's been CBS the last 2 years, but they add a lot of graphics, and when a touchdown's scored, you see some of the characters pop up in the end zone. So I think that's a way that they've tried to reach that younger audience. I also think that, back when all of us, the three of us are probably from the same generation, I know I didn't have cable TV until I was 17. We had 7 channels here in the New York area. 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. That was it. So you relied on the local teams and then the games of the week. So you would only see the out-of-town teams on special occasions, on a Saturday afternoon or a Monday night. Now, the youngsters in this generation, a lot of them don't even root for specific teams. They root for their players in fantasy football, for example. So they're not sitting down to watch full games like we did. They can watch games on their iPhone, on apps, no matter what the league, whether it's the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL. They all have their apps. They have different names, but I feel like a lot of the younger generation, like I said, they're not watching for specific teams. They're watching for their players and watching for the highlights on apps, whereas back then, we had to sit down in our living room and watch the entire game. You didn't have any other choice.
We had to sit there for long stretches of time sometimes. So, one of the things I think about with all of this wonderful innovation and disruption and technology is how far is too far, right? In sports, I'd love to hear from each of your perspective. We'll start with you, Jim. What concerns you about where we are now and where we're potentially going? How far is too far?
I'll play with your adjective a little bit and maybe not say concerned, but conflicted. And it hops on good points that both Adam and Kenny have raised, and to borrow on other good speaker panels that we've enjoyed earlier today, Kevin Mayer's comments around the future of media. I am separate and apart from the emotional appropriateness of sports betting. Do worry a little bit about how technology is making that more available. And less from a, is it right morally or ethically, and more of what both Adam and Kenny have talked about. I think Kevin Mayer mentioned that sports betting brings a wonderful new population into the sports community, and it provides individuals with different ways to experience the product and the brand. But per your reference of young children being desperately closely affiliated with teams, of teams having a local and civic connectivity to it, I worry a little bit, and this has nothing to do with the fact that my fantasy team is 1-2 thus far this year, about the fact that there is a deconstruction of the team, as Kenny just talked about, and individuals affiliating more with players, player performance, and player statistic, and not the rooting of a team and the implication that it might have with other individuals, with a community, and a locale.
Kenny, your thoughts?
No, I kind of agree. Starting with what I had talked about earlier, Jenè, about kids not necessarily rooting for teams, I think, and I don't know much about the gambling side of things. I'm certainly not an expert on that subject, but that probably plays a big role in what games people are watching, paying attention to, whether on television or on one of the league apps or at one of the sports books in Las Vegas, et cetera. So I think there are many more reasons why folks are watching games these days, not necessarily just rooting for one team.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think conflicted is a good way to put it. We saw in lacrosse, for example, kids starting to wear different colored socks and even different colored shoes in the NBA and in high school sports. It all trickles down, right, from the top of the pyramid on down. And so the individualization of sport, even within a team community, can create divides and create, like fantasy, create a different kind of affiliation that, I've got a 22-year-old and a 20-year-old. My 20-year-old son, he only cares about his fantasy team, and maybe the Dallas Cowboys when they're not playing really poorly like they did last Sunday. He's focused on fantasy. That's fine, and it creates camaraderie and team and activity amongst his buddies that want to do that, and it creates a really neat way to play across party lines when you're from city to city. I worry, and I think, I'm optimistic that the good nature of what it means to get together and play a sport and the lessons you learn inside true sport, heart, integrity, resourcefulness, teamwork, the kind of things that come from actually spending time together and accomplishing something, it translates so well to the world of business and everything else that we all engage in after we end up, letting go of being a high school hero. I think it's important that we keep our kids engaged and involved, and I think they want to be. I think post-COVID we saw kids race back to activities that didn't just take them out of the house, but also gave them a chance to reconnect with teammates and compete and win. People like to compete, and it's kind of an all-American hallmark and trademark of getting out there and giving it your best and seeing what happens. And so I think that's going nowhere. I think that's got a lot of upside to it, but I do worry about the individualization that goes on within some of these activities.
Yeah, and speaking of individualization, so we've spent some time talking about baseball and football and basketball, the big three, which have now become the big five, but we're seeing other sports, lacrosse. We were just talking about pickleball, a little bit older demographic, but how expansive the sports landscape is now and what it means to be a fan of really all kinds of sports. I mean, things that we didn't even think were sports when we were growing up, now all of a sudden become Olympic sports. So, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, what that looks like. I know you probably do.
Well, we part of our business, we're in the cheerleading, dance, band business as well as sport. Cheerleading is headed towards Olympic adoption and recognition after the LA Olympics, probably towards 32. It is an activity that by acknowledging that it's Olympic ready, turns on attention and financial sponsorship around the world, internationally, for an activity where principally young women can get engaged in a highly competitive sport. People didn't used to think about that all across every continent of the world, and it's avenues like the Olympics that give us a chance to advertise the good parts of this sport that aren't recognized necessarily by folks that just used to think of it as a sideline activity that was more of a piece of entertainment. Turning it into an athletic entertainment competition, very different twist on how people can think of conventional sports today.
Yeah, I'll maybe talk about a silver lining associated with the heathenist aspects of private equity or institutional investment in sport. And I think one of the silver linings is the democratization of capital across both male and female sport. When you look at what Kara Nortman's doing with the Monarch Collective and her commitment to deploy $100 or $200 million towards women's sports, you look at the work that Laura Ricketts and Laura Desmond are doing in Chicago in the support of women's sports in the Midwest. I think that's doing a wonderful job of both celebrating women's sports, but also driving appropriately a platform for content, for experience, for the theatrics of women's sports to be on a equal footing, much like we saw at the U.S. Open this year, about 50 years of equality. I think we need to extend that across all sports as possible.
I've been very fortunate to call women's hockey at 6 different Winter Olympics and seeing the growth of the sport exponentially. It's been so exciting to watch, and now they have a new professional league on the horizon. So, going along with what you said earlier about pickleball and some of the other sports expanding, we've all witnessed it, and it's just great to see it happen, whether at the high school level, the collegiate level, or even the Olympic and professional level.
Fantastic. 25 seconds, so we are going to get that last question in. We had a bet going on whether I was going to get the last question in or not. 2030, which is actually not that far off, scarily. One change that you'd like to see by 2030? Jim has an answer.
Can I go? Can I
You
go?
can.
All right. My hope is that the U.S. enters the semifinals for men's soccer in the FIFA World Cup competition. Soccer is a wonderful sport. It's wonderfully affordable. There are great barriers to sport associated with both equipment and coaching. And soccer is a sport that one can play with a small ball and 2 T-shirts as one side or another of a goal. And I think it would be wonderful for giving the sport a kick forward, bad pun, in the U.S. market.
All right.
One thing I know we'll see is more streaming. The NFL has gone to it on Thursday nights with Amazon. We've seen some of the other regional sports networks. MSG here in New York starting up next week with MSG Plus, where you could pay per month to watch all of your teams for some of the cord cutters with cable and DirecTV. So probably not too bold of a prediction because some of the leagues do have long-term contracts, but I think we will see a lot more streaming of their games.
Awesome.
And I'd
Final
like to
word.
see AI, and I think it will play a huge role in allowing coaches and leaders of teams all across the transom to do things for themselves so that the actual coaching time can be spent with the kids where it belongs.
I love that one. Thank you so much.